Good evening. Welcome. I want to take a moment to just welcome our community. We were just talking about how hard it is to not be together in person this year, but that we're all having a really, in spite of the challenges, technology is actually sometimes a gift. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I'm George Marie. I'm the program manager for writing at the Port Townsend Writers Conference and at Centrum. Before we get started with our reading, I want to offer a brief land acknowledgement. Centrum and the Port Townsend Writers Conference are located in Port Townsend, Washington, known to the Scollin people as the village of Katai. Scollin people and the Salish Coast people continue to live here and thrive here, and they continue to steward their homelands, and we are honored by their efforts. And now I'd like to pass this over to Sam Ligon, who is the artistic director for the Port Townsend Writers Conference. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, George. Good evening, everybody. I hope you're having a good night. I hope you had a good afternoon. I hope you're writing a lot and that your writing is fantastic and you're reading a lot and you're eating a lot of candy, smoking cigarettes and doing all kinds of things like that that are just horrible. I'm going to start smoking again when I'm 70. I'm planning on it. I'm counting the days. I am counting the days. We got 3 readers and us, Gary, Kim, and I have read together many, many times before. So it's a great pleasure to read. I'm not really going to smoke. I'm kidding. It's a great pleasure to read with these two. We like each other and we like each other's work and we like to hang out together. So it's really cool that we get to read together again. It's exciting. We're going to go, you might have noticed, I'm trying to kind of break up the poetry and the prose each night. So tonight we're going to go poetry, prose, poetry. That's what I typically try to do. So we're going to start with Gary tonight. And I'm going to introduce him right now. Gary Copeland Lilly is the author of 8 books of poetry, the most recent being The Bushman's Medicine Show from Lost Horse Press, and a chapbook, The Hog Killing, from Blue Horse Press. He earned his MFA from the Warren Wilson College Program for Creative Writers. Lilly is a veteran of the U.S. Navy's Nuclear Submarine Force. He's originally from North Carolina and now lives, writes, performs, and teaches in the Pacific Northwest, where he also serves as the greatest living writer of all time. He has received the Washington, D.C. Commission on the Arts Fellowship for Poetry. A founding member of the Black Rooster Poetry Collective, he has published in numerous anthologies and journals and was a finalist for the 2018 and 2020 Washington State Poet Laureate. He is a Cave Canem Fellow and can usually be found with a guitar strapped around him. Please welcome Gary Lilly.
Thank you all. Thank you, Sam. I just want to acknowledge the work that you've done, the time that you've been here as artistic director, and like, man, how this community has really changed and has grown. Change is not the word, grown is and stuff. And we're just talking about all the connections that we've made here, that we have, all the friends, and wow, I can't wait till next year. How I survived my murder. I filter my glass of drinking water, pretend to grow a beard, and wash my chapped hands every time I look at them, and keep my head buzzed to the scalp. Swallow a spoonful of vapor rub, cough into the crook of my arm, shelter in place, give up pork rinds and cigarettes. Do not forget, there are no visitors in this equal opportunity jail. Go to church. Go incognito. And obey the speed limit. I can smell benzene in the hand sanitizers. Guitar music. Guitars guard the front and back doors. I finish my spinach and I lick the plate. These are mostly all poems I've written during the lockdown and stuff. This is the only one that happened before the lockdown. This one that I'm going to read now. It's Hankering. I leave the radio on and Charlie Patton sings a Mississippi flood song. A constant heavy rain, a bluesy threat, the landslides and falling trees. The ever-rolling water that always makes me think of you. I am from beyond old school when record shops had radio stations. Midnight broadcasting from Memphis, red light booty cream all over from the South. Jesus on a black motorcycle delivers a true gospel of potholes in the road. Where I live with our mythology. We've been off and on so long, there's a sacredness about it. A cigarette, a cup of black coffee, the juju band radio, I keep it low to hear the spirits better. At this high water moment, if we ain't got the real love thing, then what we really have is nothing. Oh, I love the blues. Which brings me to this next piece. It's this is one that was during the lockdown, and it's a bunch of vignettes, and I tried to make the vignettes into the way that our memory and that our recollections come back to us, so there's nothing linear about it and stuff, because that's the way I think that's the way it is. And this poem is called Blue Moon Ramble. Slow blues fits like a crow perched in a crooked tree. Folks ask, why am I so sad? Why don't I try to sing love songs? And I say, if I were to sing a love song, it ain't necessarily gonna be too happy, because love eventually can become sad, and those songs lean heavy on that. Now, these are a bunch of vignettes, so I gotta separate them some kind of way, and on the page I separate them with asterisks and give a little bit of white space. So here, what I'll do is let you know that I'm gone somewhere else. Woundwort spreads into meadows and slides down hillsides like rambunctious children. The run together summer days, rural Carolina coast, swamp mosquitoes swarm in the tall grass dew. Run away to Mama Daisy's at the place called Railroad. 1 mile through the woods where the tracks have been removed. Now just a game trail that exits at the blacktop, and the safety of her mending at the kitchen table, my chair pulled to the stove. Summer is a 2-month farm work in shadeless fields, those calluses long gone. But cat in the sun, look how old my hands are today. Branches of creases, lattice work around swollen knuckles, the fingernails chewed to the quick. A man whose voice sounded like beer bottles being dashed in the road. His wife's voice when he was home, like shattered dishes swept across a kitchen floor. I was 12 and I tell Mama Daisy, I don't want to be in anybody's world if she wasn't in it. She laughed and kissed my forehead. I apologized to my mother for not being able to protect her when I was a kid. She apologized for not being able to protect me. The jukebox, the girl I danced with at Hillcrest Gardens, we always did our wobble, the finger pop, the slide, the kick, our dirty Sandy Cross represent. We retired in different states, never stayed in touch. If she remembers, then there are two of us. We sat in the front seat of the car parked in front of Hillcrest Gardens. In the reflected glow of the front door, red and blue neons in the long windows, and the slow dance music from inside buzzes like a honeybee and whistles like a mosquito. Mama Daisy's wake. A mourning wreath hangs on her front door. I step from the porch into the living room where the collective grief is like an underground river meted out upon me, sorrow spoonful by spoonful. And I got probably two more poems. Okay. I thought I had them all together. I got to. The Book of Distorted Psalms. When the gospel hour of the dog becomes the time of the wolf and red howls arc across the lonesome valley and shadows fade, a desperate night in the liquor houses, in restaurants serving factory folk, peanuts and pretzels on the bar, gamblers with loaded dice and marked decks are stacking their paper on the table while long sedans are cooling at the curb. You can ante up, pull a poem from the tomb of your pocket. Yes, this is where fallen angels go. The smoke from the gypsy turning tarot cards, the smoke thick as prayers that drifts into her front room, will flip the cards for customers waiting in wooden chairs to claim their turn. They drink from mason jars they have brought from home to pass the time as quietly as the ash that falls like dust from the burning tip of her cigar. And the embers burn a hole in her tattered carpet as she crosses the cherry tip into the sole of her left shoe. And the folks in her front room, each alone, wait while her cats lick one another in the face. The gypsy's front room is crowded, and the hoodoo seeps into the tired town that sleeps believing nothing magical ever happens as holy as their weekly resurrection, and that will suffice at least until the rapture comes and the dead that empty from their graves to catch the blue line train to heaven, and those who are left behind with their corporate jobs will be chain smoking in the back seats of cars rolling from red light to red light. Don't say I never told you so. This is where the broken go. This is how they go. And my last poem is, the last poem is I have a friend who really is a gypsy in North Carolina, and she would read people, she'd do her divination through a deck of playing cards. And I always like to sit with her and sit around her. And this is a persona I wanted to try to give her voice. Okay, I want her to talk. They asked me, Pearlie, what does it mean if the turn card is the Jack of Hearts reversed? Those nasty old men round here and their liquor magic, every one of them got a bottle on their person or in their home. Those divorced drunks and wife beaters. They ain't used to being alone. And those that like to grab women by the love handles. Gray stubbled men, old mofos, worry the softening that comes with age. These inappropriate old men see a conjure about this problem because no man wants to outlive his propaganda, so to speak. They want to slip into any room, any woman they can, as long as they can. They want to die between some woman's legs. And I've known such men myself. And where do you think they are now? Thank you.
Good job, Gary. Thank you. But I'm going to read from a novel. 2 years ago, I finished a serial novel. I was writing this novel that came out in installments of over 50 weeks, 50 installments over 50 weeks. Finished it about 2 years ago, and now I'm just about done with the revision. The book is called Miller Kane, A True and Exact History. It's a story of a fraudulent historian who makes his living conning the victims of mass shootings. He returns home to save the young daughter of the woman he loves and takes her with him onto the road and trying to stay ahead of the trouble behind them. I'm going to read the very beginning, and then I'm going to read a little tiny bit later on. Miller Kane was 6 days into the Rosedale massacre when Hefner slid into the Legion Hall during an afternoon animal session. Miller didn't recognize him at first, focused as he was on a howling beagle he'd just settled into a survivor's lap. But the rage vibe was unmistakable, a disruption in the air over all that animal distraction, even as Hefner slouched and slunk and tried to make himself small before finally finding a seat by the coffee urns in back. It never would have occurred to Miller that a survivor from Cumberland would show up in Texas, 1,000 miles away, at a different massacre. Maybe the man was disturbed, weren't they all? Maybe his hurt came off as hatred. Miller had seen that before, but he couldn't help wondering just for a second if the man might be another shooter, fresh on the scene to finish them all. He didn't want to think that. Connie Lopez seemed to know something was off with the man too, watching from her table at the center of the bar room as she chopped cilantro for chili. 8 days after the shooting, this was an intimate group. People came and went, grieved at their own pace, sought comfort in ways you couldn't anticipate. Miller didn't know every person in Rosedale, but this was a small enough massacre that there hadn't been many out-of-town scammers, not that this guy fit the profile of a parasite. The lights were low for calm in the Legion Hall. The survivors were focused on their animals. Miller tiptoed out the front door to get the last 2 dogs, a Chihuahua mix and an ancient golden. He handed their leads to Connie's cousin, Wade, who distributed the animals. These were good people in Rosedale, like everywhere. Most of the dogs and cats here on loan from the Humane Society would find new homes today. Miller felt the dude in back watching him, but he wasn't going to show discomfort or acknowledgement. Not yet. Maybe the man just needed to settle in. How about a little help, Connie said, handing Miller a bag of onions. The survivors held their animals on chairs and yoga mats, their faces against fur. Miller peeled and chopped. Elvin Duchamp handed his cat to the rage dude, who took it, a good sign. Too big, Connie said about the onions. Cut them in half again. At every massacre, people shed kidneys and casseroles and money and motorhomes. A rich dude in Dallas had set up a scholarship fund this morning for the Rosedale kids who'd survived. Connie Lopez had lost as much as anyone in town, her mother and 2 cousins, but she'd been baking and cooking for days. And while it wasn't uncommon for survivors to feed each other, most of these people had been here a week now, moved in like an occupying army. Connie rolled dough for pie, mixed dough for tortillas, talking sometimes, listening sometimes, shutting down, waking up, but always working. She'd chop vegetables and fruit and meat, pour sugar and add fat, instructing her helpers, almost everyone in this tiny town, to keep stirring, to not handle the dough too much, to have another brownie, keeping herself and all of them alive, it seemed, just as long as they could keep cooking and baking and eating. Something about that guy, she whispered to Miller. I told Wade to get him out of here at the slightest. An older woman, Ruth Dozier, lowered herself to the floor, wrapping her arms around the ancient golden. The dog looked at Miller and started to pee. It's okay, Ruth said, scrambling from the puddle as Miller approached. Wade gathered the dog, carrying her outside. She wasn't hurting anyone, Ruth said. I know she wasn't, Miller said. Wade will bring her back. He walked to the kitchen, ignoring the stranger. Maybe the dog was overwhelmed. They all were. Miller himself had been on the road 5 years now, from Ravenswood to Marble Mountain, Springdale to Scarborough, Whiskey Flats to Cumberland, in circles that sometimes seemed all over the country. He went wherever the work was, which was everywhere, wherever he thought he could do the most good and make the most money. And while he didn't know how much good he'd done exactly, or how you could even measure such a thing, he did know he'd made people's lives better, if only for a little while, because they told him so, thanking him with food and cars and money and booze, giving him more than he deserved probably, though he had no idea what he deserved or what anyone did. The money seemed to feed itself. 500 becoming 5,000, becoming 10,000, becoming as much as he'd ever need, though need was as hard to measure as deserve. There were all kinds of things a person needed, money and food and sex and love, but how much money, how much love, how much of anything would ever be enough? His phone buzzed, but he didn't answer. There were no clean linens in the kitchen. He grabbed a roll of paper towels and walked through the bar room, past the stranger who turned to watch him. Hey, Kane, the man said in a low voice as Miller walked past. So the dude knew him. Lots of people knew him. Miller kept walking. I'm talking to you, the man said a little louder. Miller turned, but the lights were low. And then he recognized him, Hefner, the asshole from Cumberland, looking for problems when his problems should have kept him home. If Miller could have helped him all those months ago, he would have. But Hefner had been beyond help, intent on bringing everyone in town down with him. Miller held up the towels, meaning, hold on, I'm busy. Hefner held up his cat, meaning, I'll be waiting right here for you. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt and probably had an assault rifle out in his truck. Wade stood by Connie's table, watching everything with his arms across his chest. It was horrible what Hefner had suffered, what his wife had suffered, what so many had suffered all over the country. But people weren't redeemed by their suffering. And Hefner had been awful in Cumberland, glowering at funerals, fighting in bars, challenging everyone to hate his guts, as if he were the only parent in town to have buried a child. He knew about Miller's business, though not enough to go to the cops or the reporters, the reason Miller kept what he did so quiet. A guy like Hefner would ruin it for everyone. Miller helped Ruth clean up, then made his way toward the back of the bar with a garbage bag full of wet paper towels. Hefner cuddled his cat, glaring. Miller crouched beside him and said, it's good to see you, Jimmy. Hefner rolling his eyes. I know you got a lot to offer these folks, Miller said, everything you've been through. Please, Hefner said, spare me the bullshit. Miller could hear the cat purring, could smell something rotten coming off Hefner. I'm here for my money, he said, not the folks. Miller couldn't remember any money from Hefner, a donation maybe, but not likely. Miller hefted his garbage bag. He hoped Wade was still watching. Why don't we talk out back in a minute, he said. Give these folks, these people, some space with their animals. Hefner snorted. Miller walked away, hoping he wasn't about to get shot in the back. There weren't any cops in Rosedale, and the sheriff might take an hour to arrive if he had to drive across the county, the reason most people here had guns. One of the reasons. Outside, the air was sticky and still. Miller lobbed his garbage bag into the dumpster, his phone buzzing in his pocket. Skagit County Jail, the caller ID read, which meant most likely that Lizzie was in trouble. No surprise there. Connor had been back a week now, sniffing around for Carlene, making threats until Lizzie had finally hidden the kid out on the peninsula. But jail? Hefner pushed through the back door, his arms full of cat. I want my fucking money, he said, now. Wade followed, watching. It's okay, Wade, Miller said, hoping Wade wouldn't leave. Yeah, Wade, Hefner said, we're just fine here. Take it easy, Miller said. Wade stood by the back door. 1,500 for me, Hefner said. 15 for Sully, 9 grand for Mrs. Aiello, 6 for Tim and Marcy. So Hefner knew nothing, just as Miller had hoped. He was just another parasite now. Mrs. Aiello had paid 20 grand so far and would keep paying as long as she could keep talking to her dead granddaughter. You think I do this for money? Miller said, and Hefner said, yep. And Miller said, I do what I do to help people. Sure you do, Hefner said, just give me my fucking money. The cat yelped, twisting in his hold. Wade stepped forward. Hand over the cat, sir, he said, please. Hefner glared at Miller, working his jaw. 19,000, he said, now, today. 19,000? The man couldn't even total his own bogus numbers. Or maybe that was part of the scam, ever-changing sums to confuse and mesmerize his mark. Hefner would never be fast enough for that, though. It was more likely he didn't know how to count, but he would be able to squeeze a mark until somebody squeezed back. Miller's phone buzzed in his pocket. To tell you the truth, Hefner said, I'd be just as happy to take a piece of you. Wade had 50 pounds on him, but hurting him would only make things worse, probably. It's okay, Miller said to Wade. Give him the cat, he said to Hefner. I'll get you some money, whatever might help. Whatever might help, Hefner said. Just pay what you owe. The cat, sir, Wade said, please. Hefner pulled the cat closer, twisting as it yowled. Now, Wade said. No, man, Hefner said, neither of you. He reached for something in his back pocket, the waistband of his jeans. Wade popped him with a right to the jaw, the sound of bones crunching and crackling, the rotten smell rising, more rotten. Hefner crumpled and the cat sprang free. Okay, so that's the end of the first section. Now I'm just going to read something very short, much later in the book. I said Miller is a fraudulent historian. He writes for a textbook company. And he's contributing to right now to a high school junior 11th grade textbook. His job is to history textbook. His job is to contribute capsule biographies. And it's supposed to be, it's a section called Hero or Villain. And it's like, you know, Abraham Lincoln, hero or villain. John Wilkes Booth, hero or villain. It's supposed to be ambiguous, et cetera. And Miller is not doing well. And in fact, at this point, much later in the book, his editor is no longer even responding to these things. So Miller's just writing them into the void. This is Hero Villain 6. And this is 2/3 of the way through the book. This is Miller writing his voice. Rose Kennedy and Buffalo Bill, an American love story. Yes, there were others. Ma Barker and Annie Oakley and Eleanor Roosevelt and Kit Carson and Nancy Davis, later Reagan. And what they said about her was true, all of it. But it was Rose mostly, even with that awful husband of hers, Joe, giving the lie to Sylvia Plath's line about every woman adoring a fascist, because Rose hated Joe Kennedy. It was Buffalo Bill she loved and the litter of Kennedy dolls he sired. And it was Rose Buffalo Bill loved, though there were thousands of others, Amelia Earhart and P.T. Barnum and Calamity Jane and Curious George Custer, but mostly it was Rose at the Plaza, the Heathman, the Biltmore, the Drake, in Bill's tent, Bill's train car, at the ranch in Nebraska, and the compound on Cape Cod, where the Kennedys cultivated those unbearable accents. Bill wanted to have Joe whacked. Dean Martin would do it, but Rose said no, and Bill would do anything for Rose, except the thing Meatloaf also wouldn't do, the unnameable, the unknowable. Perhaps you've learned about what you know about sex from the internet or in health class, useful information regarding condoms and periods and fisting and Cleveland steamers. Perhaps your parents gave you a book or a friend enlightened you late at night, but whatever you know and whatever you do, you should be doing it often, even if it wears you out and reminds you of death, which famous writers think about all the time. Sex and death and death and sex and the moon if you're a poet. For Hemingway, it was sex and death and sex and food and wine and sex and bulls and fishing. but not for George and Martha, not for Abe and Mary Todd, or Nancy and Ronnie, or Dick and Pat Nixon, for whom the loving never stopped. Dick and Pat Tallahassee log rolling in the Lincoln bedroom up until the very moment of Dick's resignation. Perhaps you'll succeed in love like these Americans, transcending death like Rose and Buffalo Bill. I will never allow myself to be vanquished or annihilated, Rose said, after 4 of her 9 children had been annihilated and one, her namesake, lobotomized. She had 75 legitimate grandchildren and nobody knows how many great-grandchildren. And somehow through all that annihilation, she thrived because she was Honey Fitz's daughter, F. Scott's sister, the Kennedy doll's mother, America's grandmother, Catholic, but also a WASP somehow, a pie baker and a homemaker, the best lover Buffalo Bill ever had. And he'd had them all, Milton Berle and Bonnie Parker and Mother Teresa and Joyce Heth, who Barnum introduced him to in 1835, claiming she was George Washington's 160-year-old mammy. Bill was as big a liar as Barnum, the root of both men's heroic villainy, encouraging Americans to call out fraud and feel smarter than we ever really were. Because we knew Joyce Heth wasn't really Washington's mammy, that the Fiji mermaid wasn't really a mermaid, that Buffalo Bill never really rode with the Pony Express or spied for the Union Army. Seeing truth through the lie felt like uncovering a secret, like we weren't always at the mercy of forces beyond our control, like we were finally on the inside. People have tried forever to hide what's really going on, the teabagging and dip shagging. Your parents, for example, right this minute with each other, yes, but also with your bus driver and the mean lunch lady and the nice lunch lady and your piano teacher. Your parents doing what they do and your grandparents too, and your French teacher and the janitorial staff and all the gym teachers with each other always, but nobody more than Rose and Buffalo Bill. Cunning clover thimble, Gertrude Stein wrote, cunning of everything. What you've heard about Alice B. Toklas is true. The pie, the whiskey, her deep fulfillment of Gertrude Stein. Cow come out and smell a little, Stein wrote. It's Occam's razor and Cleveland steamer, Pascal's wager and Emma's cleaver. It's Bill and Rose sitting in a tree, Kissing. Little slam up, Gertrude Stein wrote, cold seam peaches. It's Sam the butcher. Do you know the rest of that line? Have you heard the good part? A fat Clemenza, Rose said. An Omaha plowboy, Buffalo Bill said. The bruised knuckled knock of me, Nance Van Winkle said. Sex and death and sex and massacres too. Is it possible the shooters wouldn't be shooters if they knew what Rose and Buffalo Bill knew, or if they worried less about not knowing? All we know is that Rose's husband, Joe, would not stop coming after them. They could hardly stay a step ahead of him. The reason Buffalo Bill invented his Wild West show in the first place, all that bullshit and horse piss, until Joe finally caught them and killed them both, deader than hell with his bruised, knuckled hands. But that's not true. That's impossible. This is a love story, not a massacre. This is a romance. Bill and Rose sitting in a tree, Kissing, wrapped in each other's arms and the afterglow of American twilight forever. That's that. And now I'm going to introduce Kim. I'm going to turn off my camera and pretend I'm coming up onto stage. Oh, hello, everyone. Kim Addonizio is the author of a dozen books of poetry and prose. Her most recent poetry collection is Now We're Getting Somewhere, which followed Mortal Trash, winner of the Patterson Poetry Prize. Her memoir and essays, Bukowski in a Sundress, Confessions from a Writing Life, was published by Penguin. Her other publications include 2 novels, 2 guides to writing poetry, 2 short story collections, and several other books of poetry. She has received NEA and Guggenheim fellowships, pushcart prizes in both poetry and the essay, and her poetry has been widely translated and anthologized. Tell Me was a National Book Award finalist in poetry. She lives in Oakland, California, and teaches live workshops on Zoom, and sometimes tries to unload the burden of being the greatest living writer of all time. She'll be leading a poetry retreat in Italy in summer of 2022, viral strains permitting. Please welcome Kim Addonizio.
Great reading, you guys, and thanks to George and Sam for bringing us together in difficult circumstances. I'm going to start with a blues poem, and it's called Black Hour Blues, and all you really need to know is that black is a word that's attracting lots of different meanings, and Ghost Ship and Grenfell Tower refers to some places that burned. Black Hour Blues. Nothing is the new black's shit soundtrack. The elk's black blood leaks from the roof rack. Black the prospects of the destitute sick. Blackberries suppurate in the pie tin. Green cards burnt black in the gas-lit oven. Black mold loitering in the privacy of prison. Black Deepwater Horizon, pelican and dolphin. Through standing rock, a black worm crawls. Black Baltimore, Mali, Iraq, Sudan, Cambodia, Sinai, Selma, The darkling beetle raises its black back and runs through the black ghost ship and Grenfell Tower ruins. Black Syria, Somalia, Ferguson, Attica, Gaza, Yemen, Black heart weighed against an ostrich plume, blindfolded goddess, long sword drawn, nowhere in the come down, come down. And that's, of course, an image of Lady Justice at the end of the poem. Seems to be oddly missing most of the time. This is, I was talking to my students, I'm teaching a sonnet workshop, and I was telling them that I had wanted to write some mono-rhyme poems, and I finally did. This is a mono-rhymed sonnet called High Desert, New Mexico. Temple of the rattlesnake's religion, deluge and heat surge, crash of the atom's rupture. Night blackens like a violin, and bright flower falls from the kitchens of heaven. This is where the seams begin to loosen, where you can walk for miles in any direction. Rabbit, lizard, raven, insect, drone, and almost forget the shame of being human. Smoke tree, sage, not everything is broken. Horses appear at this remote cabin to stand outside and wait for you to come with a single apple. Abandon your despair, you who enter here forsaken. The wind is saying something. Listen. And I was going to do a couple sonnets from this early book, Mortal Trash, but I decided to read a poem for Sam instead. Sam and Gary and I play music together lately online, which is a trick, but we managed to have some fun trying to jam together across great distances. But I just want to say that there's a series of sonnets in this book, Mortal Trash, that is 14 invasions of Shakespeare's sonnets, various Shakespeare sonnets, sort of flipping the script. We had looked at a couple of sonnets in class, like Sonnet 73 and Sonnet 18, and there are invasions, perversions, whatever you want to call it, of those sonnets among them. So if you're interested in what I was doing there, check out what's in Mortal Trash. But this is for Sam. This is called Guitar. Sometimes it sleeps all day in its case like a stringed vampire. In the store down the street, its friends are hanging like hams. Guitars like hearts can be anything. If you really want to break your lover's heart, it's simple. Just immerse yours in tepid water and walk out of the kitchen. Go call someone you always wanted and play them a song on your new guitar. Don't break your own guitar unless you happen to be a guitar god in which case go ahead and smash it with the impunity befitting a god. Also feel free to smash your chosen people while reminding them how much you love them. My guitar is often depressed because it takes itself seriously as the instrument of a few generations of sensitive singer-songwriters. The ukulele has lately grown in popularity, but a uke is so babyish. Playing it is like trying to placate a god by ritual murdering a sacrificial blankie. When my guitar is sad, it glows eloquently and goes berserk, thinking of light thinning in a hospital gown, and the sound of paper slippers on gray linoleum, like a voice being mopped off the tiles. A guitar, like a heart, has a hole in it. It heaves out its music like a twerking volcano, like a faucet leaking bluebells in a gutted house. Heart like the last red wolf in the decimated population of eastern North Carolina, looking for a mate. Heart like a target, hole like an exit wound. Play on. And this is another mono-rhymed sonnet called The Miraculous. The band starts the song over, the rhythm still wrong, sounds that will never alchemize to music. My brother's new liver is failing. There's someone's loud lover swearing to Christ in the bar to get sober, but the moon is being smothered by the trees and there is no ladder far enough. I go down to the mouth of the river, ugly with waste, yellow foam and trash. A tanker crawling the horizon. What does it bear? Oil or chemicals? I was taught a man could walk on water, that if I listened and unhinged my heart, I'd hear a presence stirring the air. And I do. God the murderer, making things perfectly clear. I do have a little more time than I thought, so I'm going to read one or maybe both of these sonnets from Mortal Trash, just to give you the idea. This is, so what I did was flip the script of an older man in love with a younger man and made it an older woman in love with a younger woman. And then in the final Dark Lady sonnets, which are the last several sonnets in Shakespeare's sequence, I created a love triangle with a dark gentleman. So just sort of playing with the personas in Shakespeare's poetry. And this is number 18, which is the one, begins, shall I compare thee to a summer's day, and ends, as long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So a little alternate take on some of that. We went back in the dark singing. I couldn't compare this to anything. I'm not going to talk about it now. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven, Cyclops king in the land of the blind. You're too far away, please come. Every airline fare sometimes declines. It's May in New York, still raining. April has a hangover, winter was terrible. I didn't sleep last night either. And then italics, I don't know how I am. Sorry about your father, call me anytime if you need me. Death still has bragging rights. This line has stopped breathing. So they're kind of strange. And here's another one, number 73, which is that time of year thou mayest in me behold. It's that time of year, ice in the trees, snow like dirty light piled beside the trash bags, city gardens behind chain link fences, mired in white except for an occasional rat. Everyone lately has cancer. Philip Seymour Hoffman is dead of an overdose. Everyone's sad and fascinated. Black night is falling in a song. I prefer the one about the glowworm. Illuminate yon woods primeval. Come to bed, my aeronautical glimmer. Draw a treble clef. A few notes will swoop down. Nothing lasts anyway, and we leave nothing behind. And I will close with another from this new book now we're getting somewhere. It's called Stay. Sort of dedicated to the self-destructive among us. So your device has a low battery and seems to drain faster each day. Maybe you should double your medication. You might feel queasy, but also as if the spatula flattening you to the fry pan has lifted a little. So your breath comes out scorched, so what? Inside, trust me on this, there's a ribbon of beach by a lake. In the sand, fragments of a fossilized creature resembling a tulip. Back in the Paleozoic, online wasn't invented yet, so everyone had to wander alone and miserable through the volcanic wastes or just glue themselves to a rock, hoping someone would pass by. Now you can sob to an image of your friend a continent away and be consoled. Please wait for the transmissions, however faint. Listen, when a stranger steps into the elevator with a bouquet of white roses not meant for you, they're meant for you.
Yay! Audience, I'm asking you for questions. If you have any, post them in Q&A, and I will start with a question for both Kim and Gary. I want to talk about form because Kim, you know, I think of what you do with form and how you work with form and how concerned you are with form. And I wish you could talk about that a little bit. And within that discussion, tell me what monorhyme means. And tell me why form matters so much to you.
Well, the monorhyme is simply one rhyme. So every end word in the lines of those pieces I read, the monorhyme pieces, rhymes with every other. And sometimes what's fun is if you're not doing really strict rhyme, it starts to morph a little bit. So you end up with something that rhymes with the word ahead, but then the one next to it can get a little farther afield because it's rhyming with the one before it. And I just love, we've been talking a lot in my class about this. I just love the way that form gives you a limit that the imagination then wants to play with and think about and subvert in some way, and how generative that is to do that, and how much fun that is ultimately to give yourself a formal limit and then try to create something within it.
And how do you feel about, I'm thinking of the form you created. Will you talk about that for a minute?
The Addonizio? Yeah, it's really fun. You know, various writers have invented forms, and you know, the golden shovel is one that I think it was Terence Hayes who invented it. And you know, he's done some really cool, interesting formal things. And so I read Billy Collins's Paradel, that was a form that Billy invented, but he gave this little provenance of where the form came from that I and a number of other people fell for. I thought, oh, this is a real form from the troubadours. And, you know, so I just thought it would be fun to invent my own form and make up where it came from as well. So I attribute the invention of the Addonizio to, I think, a contemporary of Dante's back in the 1200s. So
nice.
Yeah.
Gary, what are your thoughts on form?
I think about form. What I think about it is, I was asked that one time, if I thought form was dead, and like, because I had never written in anything but free verse at that time, and so I did own up to. I was afraid to say yes, because this is like my professor. I no, who wants form? I'm doing free verse. So yes, but form is not dead. That was me. Form is not dead. And it was, why don't you write in them then? And I got challenged to write in them and stuff. Now, you start to think form is so restrictive and everything, but it's like, it is so liberating to do it. Mm-hmm. You know, so when I think about form, I look at I look at structures for the poems. You know, when Claude McKay wrote all those poems, when he did sonnets, he was jumping on something political that he had not experienced before, and to contain that's emotional scope. You know, he used a sonnet, he used a poem. What a container it is, you know. And it's like you set your criteria, which you know, as Kim did, which she created a form and stuff. And because she named some good ones too. And now I got to do one of hers. I got to write one of those, you know, like Addonizio's and stuff.
Yeah, go for it.
I got to, you know, and it's like the golden shovel, yeah. But forms, Americans have been doing sonnets from, and I don't mean those way out things that I've seen some poets do and stuff, but like Terrence Hayes, American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin. That, and every poem has that same title and stuff, but in the structures, and then being able to look at the differences of what he's doing with each one of those and stuff, you know. To Him But Jess uses it, Ani Jeffers, everybody is stepping into those, because look at the times we're in. Tell me that's not a sonnet time. You know, this is when Claude McKay wrote them. You know, if we must die, let it not be like hogs pinned down in some inglorious spot. Well, around us march the mad and hungry dogs. It's like, this is when he did that and stuff. You know, where he comes from, he was never a minority until he came to America. And that is what he came during a time when there was so much violence, so much race violence, you know, that he wrote those sonnets. And only the sonnets contain that rage for him. His other poetry doesn't have, he doesn't do this, but I bet you when you find a sonnet of his, that's what it's doing, you know.
Gary, I wonder if I can ask you about, you know, I've never heard, you know, those short poems you read that you were calling vignettes, right? So there's a form that's being established there within a certain movement. Did we hear the whole movement of those vignettes? Did we hear all of them?
Yes.
Okay, so do you view that as one movement?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so tell me about that form and how that came to be.
Well, I started thinking about memory, you know, and how unlinear it is, you know, that when things come to us and stuff like that, you know. So what happens if there's a situation, or you look at a long span of time for your speaker, for your character and stuff, and what happens if there's this recollection of memory? This is why it's ramble, because it's rambling on, Blue Moon Ramble, you know. So it rambles on, but it is, how does memory come to us? It comes to us in flashes. So that kind of dictated how brief I wanted each one of them to be and stuff, you know.
But you limited it in terms of era, in terms of certain characters, in terms of, you know, I mean, you've got a box for it that becomes clear as the thing unfolds.
Yes. Mm-hmm. It's yeah, because you can go out, but I wanted to just show the it's different, it's the same people a lot of the times in this whole suite, right? It's the same people, but we go through different times in our lives, and the memories of all that, it's not chronological, you know. And you can look back and what things have become important to you. There's a mix, you know. Oh, my grandmother was being able to always go to her house. I don't care what was happening, you know. That comes, you know, and I think about her all the way, you know, all the time. So, and the events in your lives and stuff, you know.
Was the grandmother Mama Daisy?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. That was actually her name. I mean, everybody in the community called her that because we called her that. So it turned out to be, this is like, you know, the whole county, you know, because just amazing woman. Mhm.
I mean, I was interested in the fact that you would call them vignettes because you could call them stanzas, right? I mean, because it feels like one complete movement, but it feels like it means something else when you call them vignettes.
I think it has well, it had a certain quality in the story then. Let's look at somebody like Gene Toomer, you know, when he does those short fiction pieces. Well, they're vignettes too to me and stuff. And this is like in the 20s and stuff, you know. He's doing flash fiction back then and stuff, you know. And it was just like set in time and place and culture and everything. And like I loved how he could contain it, everything. He could express place, time, you know, everything in little bites. So that's what I want to do with this. Yeah.
Kim, I'm going to follow that with, I would like, you know, I don't know too many writers who write in as many forms, and I don't mean form in terms of poetic form. I mean in terms of different kinds of prose. You know, you write short fiction, you write novel, you write poems, you write very formal poems sometimes. You write different kinds of nonfiction. Can you talk a little bit about how you approach these different, you know, different kinds of prose, different kinds of poetry, and how that nurtures you as an artist and how it shaped your life?
How it saved my life or shaped my
Yeah,
life?
I said shape, but yeah, how it saved your life.
Yeah. You know, I consider that I wrote a couple of novels, and not that I write them. Not really interested in writing novels anymore, or really long forms, because I think poetry is really where my heart is, and that's what I want to be doing. But then I get interested in other things, and I tend to just really do things by osmosis a lot. So, you know, if I'm trying to write an essay, I'll just be steeping myself in essays, and it's just being attracted to a form or to a genre, and then wanting to do my version of it is really where it comes from, you know. So if I read something that I get excited about, whether that's a certain kind of formal poem, or whether that's a personal essay, or whether that's a short story, if I get excited by that writing, it just triggers something in me, you know, the little mimic in me that wants to go, I want to do that, you know. So I think that's just where it comes from, is really getting excited by a piece of writing and feeling like there is something in that I want to sort of try to explore for myself. And
does it, when you go away, if you say, I mean, you've written more, I mean, would you say you've written more poetry than anything else?
not in number of words, but yeah.
Okay, in number of pieces.
Mhm.
Does when you come back to poetry from prose, are you a different writer?
I don't know. Good question, Sam. Your questions have been great all week. Yeah, I don't know. It just feels like there's sort of different modes. And right now I'm in a poetry mode, and all I want to do is write poems. And so consequently, I'm not reading any essays. I'm not reading any fiction. All I'm doing is reading poetry and browsing poems. And then I think when I feel like I remember how to do this. I've written, I've got a little, it's like going hunting. Not that I hunt, but okay, I've got a little bunch of rabbits here that I'm coming home with. Now I'm going to go out after some big game, like a short story, because I feel like sufficiently satisfied by my little clutch of whatever. That's a terrible metaphor, but anyway, that's kind of what it feeds a hunger. Let's say that's a better way to think about it. And so when I'm sort of satisfied enough to have had a decent poetry meal of reading and writing poems, I'll want to go to have a different kind of meal.
Yeah. And I was thinking too about like, getting out of ruts, or like, when you put your instrument down, when you stop playing for a little while and you come back to it and suddenly you're playing a different way and you realize, oh, I was kind of maybe a little bit, and not really a rut, but suddenly you're playing differently and you have access to other kinds of sounds. Or I feel like that, with music sometimes.
Yeah, Tom Stoppard, the playwright, said something like he was a victim of multiple fascinations.
Yeah.
And that, I feel, is my problem. Same thing with musical instruments, too attracted to too many and never really get where I want to get with any of them because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're out of time, but I'm gonna ask you one more question anyway. Both of you quickly answer this. I want you to talk quickly about your relationship, the relationship you have with music and writing. What's the relationship between those two things for you? Kim, you go first.
I'll just say listening,
Okay.
paying attention and listening and creating music with the language.
And so of course, as a poet, you've always been involved with music.
Yeah, I was involved with music, but quite a while before I came to poetry.
But I mean, right, because you studied music, no?
Yeah.
Okay. Gary?
I've always been around music, but my whole thing was to have my language in poetry, to incorporate the musicality into that language. Stuff, you know, sort of being immersed in. And when I started writing, when I first started, I used to play music all the time. I had music going out in the atmosphere of music and stuff for those early books, especially. But I've always been around it like that. So it's just where I go. It's one of my strong suits.
Well, and I think we hear it in your work. I think we hear it in both of your work, actually, and some of it more than others, depending on what you're doing, where you're going straight to the music. And I love it when that happens. Right? Maybe it's just fun when I recognize it. It feels intimate and cool.
Thank you.
All right. Nice job, people. Beautiful reading.